Hi, this is Kevin at the Virtual Planetarium at Raritan Valley Community College. Welcome to our weekly Star Talk. Today we're going to be talking about some fall constellations. But before we do that, let's talk about our upcoming moon phases. We have full moon on October 20th, we have a last quarter moon on October 28th, and then we have a new moon on November 4th. Now, like I said, we're going to be talking about some fall constellations that we can see. I currently have our planetarium sky set up for October 10th. That's in the middle of this week. But because these are fall constellations, you can actually see them throughout the whole season. They're called fall time constellations because they're highest up in the sky during the fall. So for the next few months, you'll be able to see these constellations. Now, I currently have the sky set up for 8 o'clock, and we are looking towards the east and northeast. And we are going to start with a group of stars that is directly above the northeast. And if we find that right here, we go directly upwards and we find a group of stars that looks like a sideways W right here. This is the constellation of Cassiopeia. And if we get rid of the artwork, we can see that W right there. And Cassiopeia is supposed to be this queen in the sky. It's supposed to be this queen in her throne. And I need a little bit of help with my imagination for that, but here we have it. It's one of the easiest constellations to find because it has a very defined shape, and the stars are actually fairly bright compared to everything else around it, so it's very easy to spot. Now, another cool thing about Cassiopeia is that it's something called a circumpolar constellation, and that means that for where we are in our latitude, it never sets in the sky. So no matter what time of the year it is, it will always be up in the sky. Now granted, sometimes it'll be very close to the horizon, so it'll be behind buildings and trees, so you might not be able to see it, but it is still up in the sky, so that's really cool. Now the second constellation we're going to look at is actually towards the east, and on the 20th, the moon is going to be full, and if you go directly upwards from that, you're going to see a very big square of 4 stars in the sky that we talked about in an earlier video, and this is what is known as the Great Square of Pegasus, and that's because it belongs to the constellation of Pegasus. Now Pegasus, as you might know from Greek mythology, is the winged horse, and the Great Square right here is just the torso, and then we also have the head coming out in this direction, and then the 2 front legs over here. Now you might have noticed that he's missing the back half of his body, and that's because the story goes that a lot of pictures have him that he's coming out of the water right here, heroically flying out of the water. Now, it also is because the stars that are on this back half of the constellation actually belong to another constellation, and this one star of the square right here is a shared star, and it's shared with the constellation of Andromeda. Andromeda, the constellation of Andromeda, is really just these 1, 2, 3, 4 stars in a line, and then 1, 2 stars up here in this direction. And it's supposed to be a princess in the sky which is chained to some rocks, and that's because of the story that concerns Andromeda in Greek mythology, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Now, the fourth constellation we're going to talk about is actually below Cassiopeia and Andromeda, and if you draw a line from this constellation and cross it with this constellation right here, we come to a group of stars right here. Now, this constellation doesn't really have a defined shape that's easy to find, but it does look like a recognizable blob of stars in this part of the sky. So if you found Cassiopeia and you find Andromeda, you can use them to find this group of stars right here. And this is the constellation of Perseus. And Perseus is actually the main protagonist of the story we're going to be telling today, which concerns all of these constellations right here. So it's a little bit of background. Perseus is a demigod in Greek mythology. He is the son of Zeus, which is the great god of all of Greek mythology, and of a mortal, so that makes him half a god or a demigod. Now, in this picture, we can see that Perseus is carrying something, and this is the head of Medusa. Medusa, as a reminder, or in case you don't know about Medusa, was a creature in Greek mythology which had snakes for hair, and also, if you look directly into her eyes, you would be turned to stone. So in one of Perseus's acts of heroism, he slayed Medusa and cut off her head, and usually walks around with her head like in a bag or something. Now, the story of all these constellations goes that Cassiopeia right over here and her husband Cepheus, which is actually also in this part of the sky. It's just a lot dimmer, so it's harder to see, so we don't really talk about Cepheus that much. But Cassiopeia and Cepheus were king and queen of this kingdom, and they boasted that their daughter Andromeda right over here was the most beautiful creature in person to ever live. They even went so far as to claim that she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. And this comment was not taken nicely by Poseidon, the Greek god of the oceans, and he was very mad about this because he was very proud of his sea nymphs. And because the king and queen insulted Poseidon like this, they decided to send a great beast to destroy their kingdom. The great beast is also in the sky. It's actually where the moon is down here. It's usually pretty close to the horizon, so we don't really talk about it too much in this latitude, but it is also in this part of the sky. And the great beast is the constellation of Cetus down here. It's actually where the moon is right now, so that's pretty cool. But because the king and queen insulted Poseidon, he decided to send this monster to destroy their kingdom. And what did the people of the kingdom do? Well, they decided to offer Andromeda right here as a sacrifice, which is why in her picture we have her chained up right here. And it's also why a lot of people call these stars in a line right here rocks, the rocks of the Andromeda constellation, because the people of the kingdom tied up Andromeda to these rocks and offered her up as a sacrifice. So if the monster took Andromeda, it would hopefully spare the whole kingdom and the people's lives. Now you might be wondering, where does Perseus fit in this whole story? Well, Perseus actually flies in as a hero, and he flies in on Pegasus right here, and he defeats the monster Cetus using Medusa's head. So he actually uses Medusa's head to turn the monster into stone, and therefore saving and rescuing Andromeda. And then, like a lot of stories in Greek mythology goes, the hero got to marry the person he saved, so Perseus ends up marrying Andromeda as well. So it's a pretty known story in Greek mythology, but the really cool part about it in astronomy is that all the constellations pertaining to the story are in the same part of the sky. Now, Perseus, the myth goes that he was put up in the sky for his act of heroism, and Pegasus as well, since he helped Perseus. And then why these two are up in the sky, I'm not really sure, because they were kind of the villains in the whole story, and so was Cetus. But you know, they're all up in the sky, and they're all part of the fall constellations, because again, they're highest up in the sky during the fall, so that's pretty cool. Now, cool thing about Perseus, Andromeda, and Cassiopeia is that they actually have a lot of deep sky objects hidden inside of them. We won't talk about them in today's video because we don't have enough time, but we will talk about them in a few weeks. Next week we're going to talk about Halloween, so we won't be talking about them. But in 2 weeks we'll revisit these few constellations in the sky, and we'll talk about the cool stuff that you can find inside of them using only a pair of binoculars, so that's pretty cool. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Hope you learned something new. You should definitely try to find the constellation of Cassiopeia. That's the easiest one to find. And again, it's just that sideways W in the sky with the bright stars and very easy to spot. You can also find the Great Square of Pegasus because it's just 4 stars that are a very big square in the sky, and they're pretty bright compared to everything else around it. And using Pegasus, you can try to find Andromeda, though that one's a little bit harder, but you might just find that chain of stars right there. If you like this video, be sure to give us a like, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. We're going to be putting up a new video every week. Like I said, next week we're going to be talking about Halloween and astronomy, and then after that we're going to be talking about the different deep sky objects we can find in the constellations that we just talked about today. So that's pretty cool. Again, thank you for joining us, and hope you have a great week.